All right, think about the smartphone in your hand or even just the price of your morning coffee. Pretty much everything around us is powered by a vast, wildly complex engine, and that is global capitalism. Now, it's a term we hear literally every single day, right? But truly grasping how it operates behind the scenes, how it evolved to this point, and where it might be heading next, well, that's a lot to unpack. So today, in this explainer, we are going to break down the academic research, historical data, and systemic analysis from our sources to give you a really clear, structured picture of this global engine. Let's just dive right in. To really get a grip on the sheer scale of our modern system, consider this absolutely staggering number from the research of sociologist Peter Phillips. Just 17 global financial conglomerates manage over $41 trillion. I mean, let that sink in for a second. To put that into perspective, that is more than the entire economic output of the US, China, and Japan combined, and it's all managed by a group of companies small enough to fit their CEOs in a single conference room. Our sources describe this as a self-invested network of interlocking capital spanning the globe, making it almost impossible to separate these conglomerates into neat national boxes anymore.
So naturally, this leads us to ask, if less than 24 firms hold that much wealth, who is actually pulling the levers in such a deeply interconnected global economy? And honestly, how did we even arrive at a system with such an unprecedented concentration of wealth? To answer that, we can't just look at the world as it is today.
To unravel this mystery, we first need to look right under the hood at the foundational DNA of the capitalist engine.
So what makes capitalism capitalism? Scholars across the board generally agree it's defined by private ownership and the endless pursuit of profit. It operates as an engine built specifically for growth and accumulation. Interestingly enough, the roots of the word trace back to the 1791 French word capitaliste, coined right around the French Revolution. In this setup, land, labor, and capital are bought and sold on open markets. But let's actually pause on that idea of wage labor for a second, because that's where it impacts us directly. Instead of producing things for ourselves to survive, like growing our own food, we sell our time and our skills for a paycheck.
Because of this highly unique DNA, academics have basically spent centuries arguing over how to even view the engine itself. In one corner, you've got Adam Smith's theory. He emphasizes self-interest, free markets, and the incredible efficiency created by a complex division of labor, arguing this system universally improves living standards. But then, right in the opposite corner, you have Karl Marx's critique. He views the exact same system through the lens of class conflict, arguing that it inherently relies on extracting surplus labor and exploiting the working class to generate those profits. And as our sources highlight, both of these fundamentally opposed perspectives absolutely continue to shape modern economic thought today.
Of course, capitalism didn't just pop into existence overnight in its current form. It's a system that constantly mutates. So let's zoom out and trace how this economic software was installed across the globe.
Historically, researchers trace a really fascinating evolutionary path. It starts out relatively simply with European agrarianism and mercantilism between the 16th and 18th centuries. Think merchants and farmers. But then it hits a massive accelerator. The 18th century Industrial Revolution brought these booming factories that completely dictated daily life. Finally, this evolved straight into worldwide integration in the 19th and 20th centuries as the system continually hunted for new markets and hyper-connected supply chains.
Harvard economist Danny Roderick maps this out beautifully into distinct historical epochs. It's almost like the system upgrades itself whenever there's a major failure. He calls the largely unregulated 19th century era Capitalism 1.0. When that crashed during the Great Depression, society patched it with Capitalism 2.0, featuring Keynesian economics and strong welfare states. But when that model stagnated, we rebooted into Capitalism 2.1 in the 1980s. That's the era of neoliberal globalization we're in now, where markets deregulated and capital flowed freely across borders.
And that final transition to neoliberal globalization, that fundamentally changed the geography of power, moving us away from bounded national economies into a truly transnational system.
As capital went global to find new markets and cheaper labor, scholars noted it led to a concentration of wealth that is, frankly, almost hard to comprehend. By 2015, just 20% of humanity owned a staggering 94.5% of the world's wealth. Meanwhile, the remaining 80% of the global population had to make do with just 5.5%, meaning the vast majority of us are likely navigating life with that tiny remaining sliver of the pie. So who exactly manages all this globally concentrated wealth? Sociologist Leslie Sclair argues it's run by a new, transnational capitalist class, operating largely above any single government. Sclair neatly organizes them into four fractions. You have the corporate fraction, made up of transnational executives, then the state fraction, composed of globalizing politicians and bureaucrats, there's the technical fraction of global professionals, and finally, the consumerist fraction, merchants and media conglomerates selling us our lifestyles. Together, they push for a seamlessly borderless economy.
This dynamic creates a scenario that researcher William I. Robinson calls a global class war. He argues this emergent transnational bourgeoisie manages global circuits of accumulation that actually supersede traditional national borders. It's no longer just two countries trading finished products. It's a totally decentralized production process. Your smartphone might be designed in California, use minerals from Africa, and be assembled in Asia. The process itself is globally dispersed.
But, and this is a crucial nuance from our sources, we have to remember that global capitalism is not a single identical monolith operating the exact same way everywhere.
Different regions adapt to globalization differently, creating distinct production regimes. In the West, we're mostly used to liberal market economies, defined by corporate competition. Then you have coordinated market economies, which rely more on non-market institutions. But contrasting sharply with both is the state capitalism model driving China's rapid rise. There, the government itself acts almost like the ultimate corporate board, directing state-owned giants to achieve strategic global dominance.
Regardless of the specific variety, though, the entire global capitalist system is currently facing what researchers identify as an epochal structural crisis.
Which brings us to a pivotal, almost existential question posed by critics and environmentalists alike. If the system demands perpetual expansion just to survive, can endless growth actually exist on a finite planet?
Scholars like Robinson outline this as a multidimensional crisis. Basically, it's not just one thing going wrong, it's several intersecting failures. First, there's a structural overaccumulation of surplus capital, meaning the global elite have amassed so much wealth there literally aren't enough profitable places left in the real economy to invest it. Second, we're seeing political crises of state legitimacy due to runaway inequality. And third, perhaps most pressingly, there's a dire environmental threat to the biosphere itself.
Now, historically, capitalism has survived massive crises before. Economist Joseph Schumpeter famously argued that it thrives through cycles of creative destruction, constantly destroying old models to build more efficient ones. Think about how streaming absolutely destroyed the video rental industry, right? But some sociologists in our sources argue we might be reaching the historical exhaustion of these renewals. We're running out of new global territories to incorporate, and we are quite literally running out of ecological runway.
It really all boils down to this brutal contradiction, summarized perfectly by author Peter Joseph. The biosphere requires balance, but the market system requires growth. The absolute physical limits of our planet are finally clashing head-on with an economic engine that mathematically requires perpetual expansion, debt, and resource extraction just to maintain itself.
So the huge takeaway from this explainer is that global capitalism is at a profound crossroads. As geopolitical tensions rise and ecological limits are severely tested, change is inevitable. While we don't know exactly what replaces neoliberalism, we are left with the ultimate question. What system will emerge next to stabilize our rapidly changing world? Will it be highly regulated digital capitalism, a new form of state capitalism, or something else entirely? It is the question that will absolutely define our century. Thanks for joining me for this explainer. Keep questioning the systems around you, and I'll see you next time.